I'm Alex Berger. I'm a criminal defense attorney based out of Marquette, Michigan. Recently, I got a response to one of my YouTube posts asking, isn't it an instant arrest if you refuse a sobriety test? This is a great question. The answer is no, it's not an instant arrest. I'm going to respond in three parts. First of all, I'm going to explain what the field sobriety tests are. Second, I'm going to explain what can happen if you refuse. And finally, I'm going to go a little bit more into why you should refuse to do field sobriety tests. First, what are they? When we talk about field sobriety tests, we're generally talking about the three standardized field sobriety tests. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration puts out a program to train law enforcement officers on how to do impaired driving investigations. And the hallmark of that training is the three standardized field sobriety tests. This is the manual that they put out that they use for the training. I've gone through the training just like law enforcement officer has, and I generally know a little bit more about it than your average officer that's out there pulling people over for OWI. And it consists of three different tests. The first is an eye test called horizontal gaze nystagmus. The second is a walk and turn test, and the third is a one-leg stand test. These three together are the standardized field sobriety tests. They do some other tests, but those aren't standardized. Standardized means that they've supposedly gone through some scientific testing, and they show impairment. When officers do these tests, they're looking for what are called clues, and basically those are specific mistakes that you can make on these tests that supposedly show impairment. These tests are very hard, and your average person who has no controlled substance or alcohol in their system could probably be found to have so many clues that they would be impaired. So it's really up to the officer to interpret the results and decide if someone's impaired. Now, an officer can't just walk up to a random person and ask him to do field sobriety tests. They need to have reasonable suspicion that the person is impaired. So usually how this happens, an officer pulls someone over for speeding, they go up to the car, they smell the odor of alcohol, smell the odor of marijuana, and then they think, hey, this person might not be safe to drive, and then they ask them to step out of the car and do some tests. So it is important to remember the officers need reasonable suspicion that you're impaired before they can even ask you out of the car to do the tests. Once they do the tests, the purpose of the tests, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is to try to develop probable cause that the person may be too impaired to safely drive, and then they need probable cause to arrest that person. So the purpose of these tests is not to show that you're sober, it's to show that you're not safe to drive. And officers don't even ask you to do them unless they already have a belief that you're not safe to drive. Now next, what happens if you say no? The way that officers typically ask this question of whether or not you'll do tests is they say, would you please step out of the vehicle? I'd like to make sure you're safe to drive. They don't really say, would you agree to do field sobriety tests? They phrase it in a way where it seems more like a command and less like a request. So if they ask you out of the vehicle to do field sobriety tests, you should politely say, no thank you, I'd prefer not to do those tests. And what they should do at that point, what the officer should do at that point is either one, arrest you, because they believe they already have probable cause to arrest you, or two, let you leave, because they don't have probable cause to arrest you. So think this through. If you are asked to do field sobriety tests, and you refuse, and they arrest you, the officer was going to arrest you at the end of the test anyway, because they already had a belief you were impaired. And if you refuse, and the officer lets you go, then great. That's how it should go. A lot of times it doesn't go that way, but that's how it should go. Which leads me into my third point. Let's say that an officer pulls you out of the vehicle, asks you to do field sobriety tests, and you say politely, I would rather not. And then the officer arrests you. An attorney like me, getting in on the case, will evaluate whether or not that officer had probable cause to arrest you, and if they did not, if there wasn't enough evidence for them to reasonably believe and conclude that you were impaired, then we can get the case dismissed. Whenever people refuse field sobriety tests in a case that I get on my desk, it drastically increases the chances that I can get that case dismissed because it gives so much more fodder and so many more arguments that I can make for why law enforcement should have never arrested that person in the first place. Next and most importantly, you are presumed innocent until the prosecution proves your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to remain silent and not incriminate yourself. These are constitutional rights. When you say no to field sobriety tests, you are simply invoking your constitutional rights. There is no criminal penalty, there is no civil penalty for not agreeing to do field sobriety tests as long as you're respectful and polite about it. If you agree to do field sobriety tests, all you are doing is giving them ammunition, giving them reasons why you're supposedly impaired for them to arrest you and potentially convict you when they explain it to the jury or the judge. These tests are subjective. These tests allow the officer to decide what they see and what clues they identify of impairment. If you are arrested, it is a lot harder for me as your defense attorney to go through and pick apart for why those field sobriety tests are bogus and why the officer didn't do them correctly versus just not having to worry about them if you did the correct thing and refused to do them politely. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this answered your question about why it's not an instant arrest if you refuse field sobriety tests. Again, if it is an instant arrest, if you refuse, you are going to get arrested anyway, and there is a chance they'll let you go. Regardless, if you are ultimately arrested, it makes your chances of either acquittal or getting the case dismissed much higher. Please keep the questions going. I really enjoy answering them, and I look forward to posting more videos.